All right, I guess with respect to you, we have a speaker today, so we are. Celebrate Sandy and her 30 years at Mayo Clinic. And so, we had got pictures.
Oh, yeah. I can't believe you could find these.
All right. Well, she's currently the third, you know, she's in the manager of Mayo Clinic. In 2011, president. So, like the girl that started as human being in the same place that long. And then she is a silver level certified quality fellow. Ah, and you got a low chart.
I know.
Look at your timeline. So your timeline of where you ran at. You want to share, why don't you share some of that with us?
I think you got the old kid one in there. You don't have the one where I was working for the agency.
Oh, you were?
Oh, before I ever had kids, you know, I gotta work 5 years job.
It wasn't on your resume.
I know, and I was free. I used to mostly work in the federal ER.
You were a nurse tech to start though.
It was in the float pool where I floated to the old 3D North and 3D unit. So what's that? 3D North is an RICU, 3D unit was surgery. No, 3D unit was 3D unit was surgery. Yep, 3D unit.
So you've got quite a.
I had an old patient assignment when I was in the ICU.
You went down to Florida, did that exchange program?
Did that.
You supervisor for a year.
Oh, yeah, did that.
Flight nurse. This is our critical care person.
Oh, yeah. My guys, look at me, you don't get to say anything. Yep. Still have it. Still have my helmet. Still my jumpsuit. Still have a whole bunch of pictures that I got from people when they know they should do.
Uh-oh.
Wow.
All right. So some of the other things you've done is, okay, we talked about, yeah, you are an intern supervisor for quality monitoring.
Wow.
I didn't know that. Okay.
I did, that's kind of a misnomer. So see, probably should say quality monitoring, that page is actually at the bottom.
Okay.
It's the other way around.
Okay.
Not really, it's, yeah. I was just reading, but yeah, I did a lot of quality monitoring.
Janet did, she's my expert at this.
Oh.
All right, next.
Sandy made that, I don't think she was like a part of that.
Oh, we did the nursing state program. Did you work in ICU when you were on the state program?
No. It was, I mean, technically it was like a med search floor. I mean, we had some vents, couple vents on, you know, people with that was fine, but patients, but.
Did you always see yourself in the ICU while you're there? Yes.
Well, not ICR, you don't always. Okay.
All right, here are pictures.
Yeah.
All right, next.
Well, this was a sad day here.
Oh, yeah, that was fun. Were you guys at the golf?
Yeah.
We did yoga.
Ooh.
I got the hint that she did my yoga.
I don't know, y'all were dog, I know you.
Sally,
Oh, you were quick with that. You were
That's
good.
as old as I know. All right, next. Ah, this was the field two. Do you remember that thing?
I do.
And what is this?
when we won the staff satisfaction award.
Okay.
I agree.
Oh, yeah, there's Linda.
Okay, he's in there too.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Of course.
Exactly.
It is a lovely one, isn't it? I was in Haiti. It's very hot there. It was hot there.
That was out there.
Wow.
So what part of the meeting did you do?
That's like my first day, I think, in there.
What's that? What did you do?
Well, you know, yeah. It was supposed to, the idea that your partner with them. So we did have to do education and work with the staff on, different, whatever they did or wanted as far as education goes. So we did teaching, but then, you also had to work there. And it was just a, open kind of place, I guess you could say. And so it had like a cement floor, and it had a few partitions into the walls, so things were kind of partitioned, but, they were just cots with one right next to another for patients. And the ER, I don't know, people just sort of showed up. And there were 4 beds, and we took care of them as they came in. It was odd. The one guy he was working, making cement blocks, and something happened, and he got hit in the eye. And so somebody just brought him in, and I looked at his eye, and I thought, oh, there's a piece of glass that was lens was sticking out, and he wasn't even saying a peep. He just sat there, and he put a patch over his eye, and then the head of the hospital was a priest. He also was a doctor, and so how it worked there was then he decided that the patient needed to be sent on to another facility. He sent the patient out, but then he had to go. So our hospital, that was where the patient now is gonna be custody of his hospital. And just different, it was very odd. We had a CT machine, every once in a while somebody from another facility would come and do a CT or. It was very different. We had our own pharmacy and no pharmacist. It was all open, and there would be just big bottles of narcotics and all kinds of stuff, but no one ever seemed to take them. I don't think people knew what they were. So, yeah, interesting.
All right, then we better.
Oh, man, it was just McAfee. McAfee. Oh.
You look so young there.
Oh, shut up.
Take us back to 1989. Robert Waller was the CEO, and
Waller idea.
I was here then. Okay. Oh, you want it? Let me start out with that, but
Thank you for doing that, that's perfect.
Betty Davis, and Taylor, oh, look at that, Taylor was born. Any sisters in there? Nope. Oh, this is bad, and Harry Potter was born. And they watched after. Alright. President? Reagan? And that's in 1989, Hurricane Hugo. In South Carolina. GPS started. Launched in I don't know. Galaxy 4.2. Got the World Wide Web was born. That sounds really funny.
Oh, my God.
I thought that was Al Gore.
Yeah, right. It's very outdoors.
I was thinking.
Nintendo's Game Boy came out and Disney and Game Studios opened. Oh, lovely fashions.
I remember.
Yeah, I like to study this study. I know. TV shows, Seinfeld, Cheers, Golden Girls, Roseanne, Full House, boy. And movies. I never doing it. I heard that they're making now the real people one. The real people one. Harry Styles is only declined.
He declined something.
Eric is oh, is that Saturday morning?
Yes.
Music. Love Shack. Like a prayer.
I know, and she shares my birthday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we do. And my son said, aren't you gonna go? She has a birthday.
Yearly income, 27,000. New car, 15,000. New house, 120. 97, local bread, movie ticket was $3. Not about the same.
That's really sad. You have to be sad about that. Sad that those people say. There's a bad side to the dairy farm.
Yeah.
It's bad for the dairy farm.
30 years.
A long time, I don't have.
What doesn't make, then make it. All right, congratulations. I was wondering, my mom said, no, celebrate your orange.
There you go. I'll never be able to throw this away. I'm gonna have to keep that, put something else in it.
In our group. So they can.
Yeah.
That's so good, yeah. And then, letter from me and your guest, and then of course, up.
Oh, my. Yeah.
And you would like to share anything?
I met Sammy over Christmas and I said, it was very nice. And I don't think
I'm not sure why.
I know.
Are you
it was an awesome role model. I still
What's that?
Yeah, it is better. Again, I used to work on down 14 and started, she was starting in the ICU. So every once in a while, we would have work on the phone. And we both would, then we're both this way today, we get argued down the hallway. Do that. Have a good day.
When I first started dancing, you're on the stage. And she comes and says, hi, here's your boss. I'm saying, you work here on my knee. So that's why I was in business. I have always appreciated the I didn't actually look at the kind of always look at the
Yeah.
CNS and then covering a little bit of permanent drive for work days and.
It's probably just home down and stuff.
You never, your common sense in your life, you know, when you think of words, suddenly, I never had to interview a number of people.
I remember going to talk to the documentary and all of them awesome.
You said, okay, go ahead. Okay, I'll go. Well, exactly. Where are you going to build emotions?
I'm doing the most of what, and I really like doing lots of different things, like the ability to be able to move around and do different things, different experiences, you get married to something, you can put something else on, and be able to have a lot of different
days that I've been in the building.
Just one quick, going into our, there's one thing I just wanted to read over the really next to the third, and I think it's, family members. It's really, so, I mean, everything we're looking at, product that was food on the floor, and I was just looking at the perspective, movie. So they changed it, I think that is in the trend. So they so the next whole town, and then we have a new person like it. So just so you know, in your conferences that the thing that I always do is that you see. So we'll kind of, do conferences about it. One time there was no, so it's on, to myself. Secondly, I will, speaker, I will send out, a summary of our next, and what we spent today. All right. All right, so I'm gonna let you introduce yourself, and this is the CE division, it's all in, inpatient and ambulatory medical CE practices. All right.
Wonderful. I think it's absolutely amazing that you are honoring your coworker for our coworker for her dedication to forwarding the spirit of the tomato weapons, excellence in care and the patient comes first. It was interesting just listening to you talk about some of your experiences. Very little of those experiences had something to do with your ego. They had something, most of those experiences you talked about were acts of service to others. And so I can mention, and yeah, it's just wonderful. I've never had the opportunity to be in one place for 30 years. And so that's a testament not only to you, but also to this place that people who see themselves and actually live a life with others' ties values as a part of that. So there's that. We'll get right into the presentation. My name is Koen. I am the program director for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. I sit over in Osmond on the 6th floor. So at any point, if you want to have a conversation or a cup of coffee, I'm available to do that. So we're going to have some conversations about diversity and all sorts of stuff. And I have a PowerPoint presentation, and I have handouts and all this kind of stuff, collateral. But what I'm most interested in is what are some of the things that you want to talk about? What are some of the things you were hoping that we might talk about? And if you don't mind, I'll just jot a couple of things down, and as we're progressing in our presentation, I'll make sure that I address those things. But what are some things that are burning issues for you, or things you were hoping we might use this time to kind of talk about?
As far as not actually burning issues of transgender patients, sometimes it's our patient volumes are inconsistent, so when staff get their mind, and it's hard to say this way, but the staff have to get their mindset into how to address the patient, and then sometimes it's inconsistent like that. To lose in touch with culture, and it is not meant to be deliberate or anything negative, but sometimes patients get upset, but then I upset that they'll be correct the staff, and the staff feel bad, and
Yeah. Yeah.
And we get was as close to grade that it could be. And the family was pushing for honesty, like pushing individuality that could possibly be on the phone. And usually forceful about rescue providers is become friends with that and making themselves feel cool with that. So what tools do you learn how to do this to help people work through accepting others about that, so that even though it's against what we believe, we can still be respectful and supportive of them, and we're
Yeah. Can I just touch on that just for a second? Because I'm curious if anyone has engaged with a Christian that is kind of fundamentalist or conservative that might have that same angle. Right?
I hope we both like that.
Yeah. So
It doesn't matter what their background is.
Right.
But there's different from ours.
Yep, and so
How do you get through?
So what and the reason I asked that question is because the resources that we need to address both of those are probably very similar, right? The conversations that we need to have around both of those things. And so, one of the things, again, and I'll touch on this in the presentation, are these rich tithe values. Love them, right? Because they give us some guidance as to even how to address this. The needs of the patient come first, right? Even when the needs of the patient don't come first, right? So questions around quality of life and all those kinds of things, is it in the best interest of the patient to keep them connected for a long period of time? And then the practicality of that as well is, how long can you afford? And that's not a thing we like to talk about, but it is a reality. How long can you afford to actually keep this person, and they probably will not come back in the way they want. Simultaneously, how do we pray and make those transitions? Because in those faith traditions, God can work miracles at any point in time. And so part of the question is, what is your spiritual guidance saying about this particular thing? So we bring in the pastors, we bring in the imams, we bring in those folks that can help guide that family to a better decision. And I think to think about, and we'll talk about these commonalities and differences, but to actually think about things being that different can sometimes be a barrier to actually being effective in negotiating those things. Right? So, yeah, whatever. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Other things people are thinking that folks would like to talk about or address in this section.
What would be their best course or not the best course, and then our parents and that.
The socioeconomic judgments and saying what other people should do.
Or will do.
Or will do.
We've already saying what they will and won't do. We don't want them to do that.
If I can say on that, because we were looking ahead and thinking of coming to business at one time with Sabbath. This procedure that he was looking for. And we had to figure out what was going on because he was on hospice. So the nurse called in and said, oh yeah, I'd like to come on hospice. Some doctors say I'll live a year, some doctors say I'll live 6 months. So yeah, I wanted to see it, I wanted to come, I want to have this procedure. And then if you learn more about him, he is 83 and he doesn't have a home and he sleeps on a couch. He doesn't have a business and he goes to sleep there. Sometimes he sleeps in a car in the backseat of a car at his business. And he's going to come in and he's going to be evaluated for this procedure. So already we're beginning to see the guy and we're all like, this is what it is. But I mean, it kind of reminds me of
what you're going through.
And you wonder what you're for.
Then you get, you're going to see you.
Other things folks we're hoping we might address or talk about. Which is really interesting because I don't know if folks are familiar with the Gazelle project, right? So we're building relationships there. So some of those cultural norms are very different than our Western cultural norms. And so how do we adapt to that? And then, and I think part of, to answer your question specifically, I think part of it is checking our policies and procedures to make sure that the intent that we have for those is equal to the impact. Many folks have traveled outside the United States, particularly in developing countries. When you go to the market, what is interesting about the marketplace? It's all about bargaining, right? And so when most folks come here and they go to Target, we got a problem, right? Because they're like, this is $7.95. Okay, I'll give you $4. And they're like, no, it's $7.95. They're like, okay, $5. And then people are turning, they're like, what are you talking about? Like, pay the price, right? Now, I will tell you on a personal note that the bartering was somewhat tiring when I was in North Africa. And I really appreciated coming back home and going, okay, it's $7, okay, I'll pay $7, as opposed to having to haggle and that thing. And so those cultural norms are things what we will have to kind of wrestle with. And the way we do it here is around policy. We have to recognize, ask the question, are our policies actually demonstrating kind of good impact? It makes sense not to accept text or money or honor as other folks see it. At the same time, what kind of environment do we want to have for those people who are outside of what who we have invited into this space, right? So, cool. Other things.
At the beginning, we said, oh, that's the moving on the language. You know, just get attention. And now, we said that maybe that, oh, well, I didn't know that really, so that was correctly, so no, I'm not, yes, that. This seems to be a cultural language thing that they bring with them, and what,
Interesting, right? So I'm in HR normally, and so I'm having these conversations about interviews and how much our interviews actually work. So, folks familiar with Tom Cruise? Tom Cruise has been a spy. He's been a jet pilot. He's been a time traveler and a band pilot. Right? And a samurai, right? And a samurai. Is Tom Cruise any of those things? No, but we go to the films to see him because he what? He acted out. So I think it's interesting that when we even think about interviewing process, interviewing is a skill. And anyone can develop a skill. So a lot of times, what we've really been trying to encourage people is, do that interview as due diligence, but really focus on some outcome-based, practical applications of what we need to do in that job, right? Because that's where you're finding the gaps. If you can't hide when someone says, put together this, and you're supposed to be an architect. If you can't put it together, there's no hiding. Right? And so really, how do we rethink some of that stuff? And the other part is, we can't be judge, jury, and executioner without due process and figuring out, like, how do we, is this a person? So there's some things you can't teach. What are some things you can't teach someone? How to care, integrity, morals, character, right? Being on time. And so if we have individuals who may lack some skills, are there skills that we can teach them? Because the other skills that they have will outweigh their gap. So thinking about that too. I don't like to think about disposable human beings. There is a term for white people who don't measure up to what other white people think they should. And what do white people call those folks? White trash, right? And I think that's a horrible way to describe another human being as being disposable. So, and there is that balance, right? So trying to strike that balance. Cool. Anything else you should address?
I just wanted to be worried that if you take action stuff, I heard that we're going to be held, some kind of local, docket review committee.
I didn't mean for it to turn into this kind of meeting.
No, but you know, you don't do it, which says the plan things. You know, then we have, you know, the practical hands on
Right.
it.
So this feels like it just turned into the Maury Povich show, right? The envelope says you're the dad. So yes.
Then you get open.
It's kind of fun because we hear everything from gender to religion to culture, faith, community, all these diverse things. And the people in this room care about that. But there are people in this world who don't care about that. They don't care that they are sexist, racist, discriminatory, blah, 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 blah. As leaders, when you see that, how do you deal with that?
Oh, so this, all right, so you're gonna cut straight to it. As they would say, you're cutting straight to the white meat.
Is that discriminatory?
I hope not. I would write myself a ticket. You got a demerit, you know. So here, you know, I don't want to do all the talk, but we'll do some activities and stuff like that. But here's the crux of leadership, right? I don't have control over what other people do. So last winter, as it was 2 winters ago, we had 2 bad winters back to back, so it's hard for me to remember because it's like one bad one. But I'm the head of a community. I was on the board of a community action, and it was one of those bad storms. And they had sent all the buses. The buses had got sent out, and they were schools closing. They closed early. And schools sent these kids home on these buses, and you may have heard some of the horror stories, particularly in the Twin Cities, around kids being on buses for 2 and 3 hours, using the back of the bus as a restroom, not eating, and parents don't know where they are, can't find them, that kind of stuff. So our Head Start director did something that was very unconventional and very unlike anything that anyone else did. So so the buses went out. It's really snowing. Her bus driver was saying, we're having a hard time getting through the snow. What should we do? We're, parents aren't even able to get home or that kind of stuff. And she said, bring them back. So in some of them, they were halfway to their route, and it would have been just as easy to continue on, but she said, bring them back. And so all those buses came back. The staff had to stay late. They ordered whatever, they had whatever snacks they had in the school, they gave them to the kids, they ordered whatever they could get from local folks, they spent lots of money, it was not in the budget, it was absolutely horrible, in terms of, it was a bad business decision. But it kept us out of the news. And if you're in an educational setting or you're in healthcare or whatever, being in the news for the wrong reason is horrible, right? And so we sat down, so as a board, we congratulated her, we thanked her for keeping us out, while other school districts are headlines and all this kind of stuff, we were not. And so we sat down and we asked her, what made you call them back? And she said, I made the decision based on my principles. Like, that's a great answer, right? So we were like, what are your principles? Right? And this is in front of the board and all this kind of stuff. And she said, first of all, I'm a control freak, is what she said. Right? And she said, when those kids are on those buses out in that world, I have no control. So I brought them to where I have control. She also said, I recognize that when they are in my care, that's where the parents sent them in the first place. So to send them outside of my care, where I don't have control, is against my principle. So what I would say is to those, there are lots of folks out there that I believe they do care. I don't necessarily believe they may have the skills to engage in more complex ways of living, and we'll explore that too. But what they do has no impact on it should not be a huge influence on my principles. So then the question is, what are my principles? Now, this is, I don't know if you have these family members, I do. I have a really interesting wonky family, right? And so I have uncles and aunts who are not politically correct. They don't say the right things all the time. And sometimes it feels as though they want to try to poke at folks to get some kind of rise. So they'll say the most inflammatory kind of stuff. And so as I'm growing up, I remember my mom, there was one particular uncle, and she was like, stay away from him. I don't want my kids around him. He was a bad influence, and so forth and so on. As an adult, I look back at that decision, and I just kind of shake my head. Because my mother, my father said, stay away from this person. Do you think that person got better or worse being alienated from the family? They got worse. As a matter of fact, they found other people who agreed with them, and they started breeding ideas, right? So he got better jokes, worse jokes, and worse influence when he wasn't connected to the family. Right? And so I wonder if those folks who are obtuse, who don't care, are they actually asking for help? Who comes to the hospital? Sick people. Healthy people don't come to it, and they go to the doctor. No, right? So I wonder if, does anybody have this kind of negative people in their life somewhere, right? And I don't mean direct family or whatever, right? So I wonder, right? So there are people who know where I stand on all sorts of diversity stuff. Stop talking and get to the stuff. But they keep bugging, right? They keep talking interesting stuff. And there was a time when I would get really frustrated with that. Don't you get it? And then I was at a campfire and just kind of sitting around, and I started noticing something. when the smoke's not blowing in your face, right? What are the insects doing at your campfire? Have you ever noticed that? So they may be in fact bugging you or biting you, or maybe a candle might be a better example, right? You ever set up a candle, in a kind of natural setting and blah blah blah, and maybe it's just citronella, right? What are the insects doing? How are they interacting with that? They buzz around, they're attracted to that light. So is it possible that those people who are obtuse in their thinking and their behavior are drawn to you because there is light in you? Is that possible? Is it possible that they're asking, by their obtuse thinking and behavior, convince me that I'm wrong? Now, here's the one thing that I've learned the hard way. And in those of you who have had intimate partner relationships, you can get with this, right? So if your intimate partner says, "You're being defensive," anything you say after that is an affirmation of what they just said. Like all communication is off, right? Because if you say, no, I'm not being defensive, see, right? And if you say, yes, I am being defensive, see, right? It doesn't, no more communication can happen after that, right? So I wonder when we're interacting with folks, I wonder how much, and so what I've learned is I don't necessarily address lies, either about character or about something else. I outlive them. Okay? I can't convince someone to believe something that they choose to believe until they see you live it. So I live, so one of my things is to outlive those negative things that people say or do about me. I was in a conversation just yesterday, and a guy said, well, what do you do about those people who just want to be offended? They're just looking for political correctness, they're just, and I said, I don't have any control over them. But what I can show them is that in my presence, they will never be disrespected. They won't see me disrespect anyone on purpose, right? I mean, we accidentally do things and maybe not have some of the right language or whatever, but they'll never see me do that in trying to harm someone, right? And so, no, I don't have control over those folks. All I can do is show them the light that's within me, live by my principles. And so, and I think it's very interesting that, no, let's just do it. Let's just do it. We'll see in some of these examples. Should have enough. But these differences that we think we see are very much non-existent, right? And so people want very much the same thing. We'll talk about that in just a second. So let's just do this really quick. It's a game. You can knock this out. You can do a coverall bingo or the most signatures bingo, however you want to do that. But I'll give you about 90 seconds to find someone who. And so each of these categories, I want you to find someone in the room who can respond to any of these things. All right? So you have 90 seconds to do it, starting now. So find someone who can. All
let's have one.
Yeah, you know.
Anyone in the room? Anyone in the room?
Oh, hi. You know what? Where is that? What is that?
Right, you know that, right?
I'll go on the ad and say no. There.
60 seconds.
Like always on, keeping it real.
Four, three, two, one, and game over.
Pretty good.
Get over here. Any Mortal Kombat fans?
Well, not easier, but it's all over.
I didn't want to leave you, guessing, right? All right. Cool. So as you were doing this activity, before we talk about the activity itself, what did you start to recognize as you were going through trying to find people or to even sign them with yourself? What did you recognize?
Didn't know the word or the language that it was identified, answered for you.
Right. So you didn't know the language or the reference unless it was pointed out to you. You were saying?
I think it's interesting that I made assumptions about what people would or would not know on this based on preconceived notions that I would have that turned out to be wrong.
Oh, cool. So you assumed or made some assumptions that some people would know certain things, and in fact, has that ever happened to someone where you made that assumption and you were wrong? Okay, cool.
Which I mean, says more about me and my preconceived notions than their, not knowing what those means.
Right.
Brent, you know what open, right?
It's
Now what?
not very.
Oh, yeah. I agree, it's not one.
Oh, you're trying to start a fight is what you're trying to do, so you didn't bite the hook. Very good. Other things folks are thinking about.
I was interested in knowing what people do.
All right. Yeah, so it was interesting that you were trying to find out what other people knew, right? And I will tell you that you actually do know everything that's on this sheet. But again, the context and the language may not be something that you're familiar with, right? So what is GOAT, since we went there? It is the greatest of all time, right? So someone is GOAT, they're the greatest of all time. Yeah, so that's a popular kind of media thing. So it could be sports or anything that someone excels at, right? What's the first? The first one is, has anyone ever been in a car? Right? And so many of us can answer that we have been in a car, right? Was there one that folks were really interested in that there wasn't a definition for, or, and if you didn't notice, some of the answers are upside down. So if you turn it upside down, you can see some of those.
What keeps it 100?
What is keeping it 100? Keeping it real, right? Right, so making sure that you're honest and authentic, right? I'm keeping it 100.
I want to know what has been to a cat.
With cast. All right. Anyone seen Purple Rain?
Yeah.
So anyone been to a record store? Record store. It was in Purple Rain.
A lot of times with that.
Right. So he's at a record store. And so yeah, just threw that in there for a little Minnesota. Anyone eating glass? Please raise your hand if you've eaten glass. If you're lactose intolerant, you probably have not eaten glass. Ice cream. Swedish for ice cream. Tak was the clue. Tak means thank you. She was an island, I had no clue. Right? So the point is that if you don't know, you wouldn't know unless you were in a relationship with someone or you went out and sought that information out, right? So I want you to cut yourself some slack about the language that you use or don't use, because you can only know what you know. What we also know is that, particularly given our responsibility, there are things that we wouldn't naturally know that we have to learn because of the context and environment that we're in. So let's go to the next page. And recognize that context is everything. So one of the things that you will hear me say in any presentation that I engage in is I go back to our principles, right? So someone asked me once, where does this diversity stuff stop? Like, how do we divide groups up, and when do we stop? Well, that's interesting to think about the ending. I'd rather think about the beginning, because how things start encourages how they continue and then what their end is, right? Anyone been on a date with someone who started off the date wrong? Did you ever have many more dates after that, right? Even those who are married, I would imagine that the person that you dated that didn't tell the truth or was very arrogant or pompous or whatever was not the person that you connected with for a lifetime. And if you did, there's some therapy sessions. The preamble to the Constitution simply says, we the people of the United States, in order to form a perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare and securing of blessings to ourselves and our posterity, we do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Secondly, the Declaration of Independence, paragraph 2, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So when does this diversity stuff end? When this can be said about all people in the United States. And so there's some historical context here you can pay attention to at your leisure, but I do want to go over to page 3 and really kind of think about this idea of context. So why is it that the dinosaurs, as we see them in movies and cartoons and in mass media, aren't around today? Why are those animals not around today?
I'm so sorry.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. Why are they not around today?
They went extinct.
They went extinct. What drove them to extinction?
Climate change.
So there are a number of theories as to what caused the context to change, but it did, right? So the climate did change, whether that was man-made or, no, I'm joking, dinosaurs are around before man. It couldn't be man-made. Climate change for dinosaurs. That rough group, right?
There's that push.
Right, sorry. Maybe that joke was just for me. So whether it was an asteroid that hit or there was some cataclysmic thing that happened, the environment changed and they could not adapt. And so what's the lesson for us? Adaptive, well, you guys are a bright group. Adapt or die! Right? So we have to adapt to the context and recognize that the context is constantly changing. Right? And so when the context demands certain kinds of things. So it was interesting, I was talking with some folks, and it wasn't until 1974 that Mayo hired their first African-American physician. Mayo had already been around almost 100 years or so before they hired their first African-American physician. Do you think that there were no African-American physicians available or ready to play at Mayo's level in 1974? I would say probably there were some folks way before 74 that were ready to play. But there was something about Mayo that didn't make that happen, right? It wasn't until 1990 that Dr. Heidi Nelson was hired as one of our first female surgeons, right? Were there female surgeons before 1990 that were ready to play at this level? I would suggest probably so. But there were some things within Mayo that didn't allow that to happen. We didn't seek them out, we didn't develop them, we didn't advance them. So the context has changed. And so we have a number, many of you sitting in this room are a testament to the changing context. And I will submit to you that the context is constantly changing. What is the only constant in the world? Change, right? And you said it yourself. You either change or you, or at least, yes. Right? So there's that. So let's flip over to page 4. And this is this idea of race and ethnicity. And one thing I'd like for you to think about, because people will talk about race and how many races are there, blah, blah, blah. In the United States, we talk about the races in a very specific way. And we get that guidance both from the EEOC as well as from the census, right? And what is a census? What is a census? It is a counting of people, right? So it is, inventory, so to speak. No, that was another joke. That was just for me. It is the accounting of people. And so the United States looks at people in a very particular kind of way, hence race. Now, we can talk about the anthropological nature of race or, how races are divided up. But when you fill out a HR form, there are very specific, whatever you think about races, there's very specific things that the federal government is looking for, and that is found in this document, right? And we know that there's some fallacies in some of that, that's thinking about race, right? So here's, so right at page 4, here are the categories of race that the United States government looks at. So Hispanic and Latino, a person of Cuban, Mexican, Puerto Rican, or South Central American or other Spanish-speaking cultures, regardless of race. Okay? So these are so-called racial and ethnic categories, but this is saying you are Hispanic regardless of your race. So you can be white, but if you come from any of those places, you are Hispanic, right? You can be Haitian, you can be black, but if you're from Haiti, your Hispanicness comes before your so-called blackness, right? So here's the thing. She asked the question: is it the country that you're born or where you are? And the answer is yes. Right? So now here's something interesting, right? So let's go down to this next category: white. A person having origins of any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. That's white. By the United States standards, right? And we'll talk about why I keep saying that in just a second. Black or African American. Any persons having origins in any of the black racial groups of Africa. Wait a minute. First of all, my middle school teacher said, do not define the word by using the word, right? So if I can't define black by using black in the thing, right? But what is a black racial group? And we just said that there can be white people from Africa. So that's just interesting to me. Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, a person having origin, who is not Hispanic or Latino, having origins of any of the original peoples of Hawaii, Guam, Samoa, so forth and so on. Asian, not Hispanic or, because you can be Asian and be Hispanic or Latino. But if you have Hispanic or Latino, you are no longer Asian, you are Hispanic, okay, or Latino. So a person having origins in the original peoples of the Far East, Southeast Asia, or the Indian subcontinent, including, for example, Cambodia, China, India, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Pakistan, Philippine Islands, Thailand, Vietnam. Anybody know folks from any of those regions? Do they look exactly alike? Are their cultures exactly alike? But they're lumped into this category, which I think is interesting. And then lastly, the last two, is Native American or Alaskan Native, who are not Hispanic or Latino. A person having origins in any of the original peoples of North and South America, including Central America, who maintain tribal affiliations or community attachment, right? What are the qualifiers for being Native American according to the United States government? There's two qualifiers right there. What are they? So be affiliated with a tribe and have community attachment, right? What was the purpose of the boarding schools? To take them away from their tribal affiliation and to disconnect them from the community, right? And so if this is the definition that the US government uses and there's been a policy, what do I become? So before I give the punchline to all of this stuff, what groups might be missing from these, given these descriptors, these descriptions? Parents from a variety of backgrounds, okay? Who's not listed here? Former Soviet bloc countries. It doesn't say Europe. Is Russia in Europe? No, it is where? It is in Asia. Does this say Russians as example of Asians? No, why? So why do you think the former Soviet Union bloc countries don't show up in this categorization? Because this is a political statement. Russians aren't human. They're the enemy when we think about these political statements, right? So let's go back to the definition. So right over here it says race and ethnicity designations as used by the Equal Opportunity Commission, the government, do not denote scientific definitions of anthropological origins. So if they're not using science to make these categories, what do you think they're using? It says right here that they are not using science. So what do you think they're using? Subjective judgment. They're making it up. Now here is the interesting thing about these racial categories, right? Do you think Canada has exactly the same racial categories as show up in this document? Probably. They don't. Why? Who does Canada still have allegiance to? The Queen. They still have allegiance to the Queen. Do we have allegiance to the Queen? No, we don't have allegiance to the Queen, right? We have allegiance to the Constitution of the United States, right? What about Brazil? Does Brazil have the same racial categories as we do? No. Mexico, does it have the same racial categories we do? No, they don't. Why? Because we have different definitions for these same things. A Ford F-150, no matter where you put it on the planet, is what? A Ford F-150, all things considered, right? Some are diesel, some are whatever, blah, blah, blah. But it's the same. Race is not the same. If I was born in a different country, if I was born in Haiti, I wouldn't be black, I'd be Hispanic or Latino, right? I would still be black. That's a whole nother thing. But the idea is that these things are made up, and if we hold tight to these, then we may be missing opportunity to see people for how they are. Right? And so the next piece is on page 5. It's this question of intent versus impact. And so someone asked me, well, why do we always have to change language, and why do we, why don't these people, decide what they want to be called, or why all these things? And so I talk about this idea of impact and intent. So if we look at that picture, American Girl in Italy, what do you see happening in that picture? So it could be harassment. There's a woman walking through a group of men. What else do you notice or you see?
This area.
Okay, so it could be perceived that he's grabbing his area.
Which would have to be, or
Right.
he could be being obnoxious.
Right. So everybody is staring at her. So maybe she's singing and okay. Cool. Can we measure these? So that was my next question, right? So can we measure their intentions? No, we cannot measure their intentions. We can have our perception, but we can't measure their intention. Simultaneously, can we measure the impact that is having on the individual? So if you asked her what that experience was like, and she told you what that experience was like, could that be considered a measure of the experience that she had? Right? We do it all the time with patients, right? Are you a 7? Are you a 4? Are you a 5? Right? So their pain, we're using their measure to that kind of stuff, right? So what we have to recognize is not so much so our intentions are important, and this is there's a flip that happens with intentions, right? So because people have said the road to Hades is paved with good intentions. Has anyone ever heard that? Right? And so when the impact is negative, the intent doesn't really matter. Right? So I'm walking down the hallway and someone swats me on the behind and squeezes, and we're not on the softball team together. Right? What do we call that? Sexual harassment, and more specifically, probably harassment, right? And so what happens next? What happens next? What's that? Oh, she said somebody would get a broken nose. In terms of the organization's response to that, what's supposed to happen? You could lose your job. Someone files a report. There's an investigation, and this path proceeds. But what if the offender said, I was just joking. You can't take a joke. Does that change anything? No. Why? Because the impact was so egregious to our values, right? Now, so what we also have to recognize is that intent does have its place. Because people say, well, I didn't intend to do that, blah, blah, blah. That matters when you are in relationships with folks. So anyone ever received a macaroni sculpture or given a macaroni sculpture, right? You know, anytime or an ugly tie or ugly sweater by a young person, for that pottery, somebody said, right? So that piece of art, where is the place of honor that gets placed in the home? On the refrigerator, right? And why do we place that, kind of incoherent masterpiece on our refrigerator? Why don't we just send it straight to Etsy and sell it on Etsy? Why do we put it on our refrigerator? Because that's the place where everyone goes a lot. Why else? Because it's sentimental, but it doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of value, right? And so the intention of the individual who gave it to you, because you have a relationship with them, was really important. So you keep that up at least for a week before it actually falls off into accidentally falls into the trash, right? So that's important. Why do I bring those two things up? If you don't have relationships with people, they will file a complaint against you. But when you have relationships with people, they'll help you navigate through your mistakes, right? Developing relationships is extremely important. And so if I don't know some of those words, and I need to know those words, or I don't know how cultures interact, and I need to know that, what that says to me is I need to build relationships with those folks so they will tell me. Right? I was at just speaking here a couple of weeks ago, and a group similar to this, and someone said, there was a leader who told a joke that was inappropriate, and I was just disgusted with that leader. And so I asked the question, I said, did you tell him? Well, I can't tell them that. They're a leader. I can't tell. I said, well, did you tell one of the peers? Did you grow up with that song? And they were like, no, I can't do that. And I said, well, how is this person supposed to learn? If you don't tell them, who's going to tell them? And so part of the problem was that the leader had to develop enough relationship within his own organization that people could tell him things that would actually benefit him. I remember I was on a date once, and the young lady I was with had some spinach in her teeth. And I thought it was the most hilarious thing in the world, right? And we're having this conversation, we're talking, and the spinach is just like right there, and it's just, I'm having a ball, right? She goes to the bathroom, and the kid gets up, right? And she comes back to the table, she said, did you know I had spinach in my teeth? I said, well, yeah, I thought it was cute. She was like, that's not cute. You just da-da-da-da. And all of a sudden, this is not the person I married, right? It's a long story short, right? But I wonder for this leader, how this leader felt, recognizing that he made a faux pas that nobody would talk to them about because they didn't have, they felt they had a good enough relationship, right? And so none of our leaders want to be embarrassed. I don't want to be embarrassed. If you see something about me that I need to change, please let me know. Don't let me walk around with spinach in it. And so when we think about this language, how we talk to people, we have to recognize what are our motives for talking to people? What are our motives for addressing transgender people? Because if I build relationships with them, they will tell me what to call them. Right? And we have to recognize we can't be so judgmental on people, because folks like me, the name for my social group keeps changing. We were Negroes, and then we were colored, and then we were the other version of Negro, and people still like to use that in their private time. Anyway, and African American and Black and blah blah blah. And most of those decisions that were made about my so-called social group, nobody ever asked me. Right? the government and society said, this is the label we're gonna give you. And so, so we can't be judgmental about that. So when we think about like how we work with our transgender folks, what is the most humble way to respond to things that you don't know? Ask. Ask. Right? So as a rule of thumb, there are 3 people that I always have in my life. And so I would encourage you to think about this. Even in these other categories, right? So I always have someone that I'm helping. This keeps me rounded, keeps me a rounded person, keeps me a humble person. So I'm always helping someone. I'm donating time, I'm donating money, I'm mentoring. I also have colleagues that I work with that are at my level, and we can shoot things back and forth. And they can tell me where I'm wrong and where I'm right, and we agree on things. And I also have a leader that I'm looking up to, someone that I'm aspiring to be. And I think with those 3 things, having those 3 things in our life keeps us from being narcissistic. Right? It keeps us balanced, it keeps us engaged. And so when I think about different cultures, I have a list of cultural groups that are my friends and ones that I want to be my friends. And when the list doesn't look like I want it to look or I need it to look, I go out purposefully and make those things happen. I go to places, I engage with folks. And at first, if anyone started a new exercise regimen, at some point in your life, right? So those first few times you start that exercise regimen, did anyone feel competent and feel good about those first few times in that exercise regimen, right? People hate yoga, especially if they start with downward facing dog. That is that's a horrible way to start, right? But after a while, you get used to it and it doesn't become so cumbersome. And so ask yourself, why do I need to and want to engage with folks? So let's finish the rest of this handout. Page 6, we kind of talked about this a little bit, change or die. I think it's very interesting that my parents came from Southern backgrounds. So my parents were my grandparents were from Tennessee and from Mississippi. They moved more north to get out of the oppressive South, and we ended up in Dayton, Ohio. And so my parents taught me that when I greet people to say ma'am and sir. Yes, ma'am, no ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir. In Minnesota, that's like a curse word, right? And then even saying, Mr. and Mrs., people go, oh, right? And so I started thinking about, there are different ways to talk about, gender pronouns and why do we have to do that thing? And with that, to think about Mr. and Mrs., right? So does anyone know what Mr. is short for? It's an abbreviation of master, right? Can you imagine if we walked around now calling people master, right? That would not go over very well, would it, right? So we changed that, and so we shortened it to Mr. Does anyone know what Mrs. is short for? Being owned, apostrophe S, by the master. So the master's wife, right? And it's funny because even in our hospital environment, we see remnants of that in the past. There are women who don't have their names on records because they are Mr. John Smith's wife. It's not Ellen, it's Mr. John Smith's wife, right? But we've truncated that to Mrs. And you can imagine what the other derivatives are of that, right? So it's single woman and blah, blah, blah. Why do we make those changes? Because the context demanded it, right? And so when we think about talking about gender pronouns, it's really interesting. My director, his name is Lord Lee, right? If you just saw Lord, given our conventions of naming, you don't know if Lord is male or female. Right? So a gender pronoun would be helpful in me recognizing if Laura is a male or a female. Right? We also recognize that there are people who aren't part of that gender binary. I happen to be cisgender, which means that my biology and how I express my gender are the same or are similar, right? But we also know that human sexuality, human ideologies, and human gender goes on a spectrum, right? So you can be masculine or feminine or anywhere on that spectrum. And so when we think about that, why do we want to be responsive to that so that we can be effective and build stronger relationships with our clients and with our patients and with each other? Right? What I think about somebody else's choice has no bearing on them making that choice. When I think about someone's lifestyle, someone's inclination, someone's goals for that matter, what I think about them has no bearing on their ability or choice to make those things, unless I'm working to stop them from having the ability to make choices. Right? So there's that. There's also so there's a diagram just to kind of think about gender pronouns in a more sophisticated way. I know that all iconography and all metaphors have their limits, so there may be some problems with some of those things, but it's at least a starter jar to start thinking about how to think about gender pronouns and relating to other people. And then lastly, words do matter, right? And so Brazil nuts have another name. Some of us know that other name, some of us don't, but a Brazil nut is a little nut, and people would refer to them as the N-word toes. Right? And so if someone is excited, they remember this from their childhood, they were with someone, they go out to the store and they're excited to see these on sale, and they're like, I gotta get these things, I am so excited, these are my favorite, I love those. What do we say before they utter those words?
Don't do it, Mom.
I wasn't expecting that, but don't do it, right? What we caution them. Why? It is not their fault they call them that, right? Because that's what everybody supposedly called them. My family didn't, but that's what everybody called them back then. But now the context has changed, and it's not about being politically correct. And people will try to sell you on that. Well, I don't want to be politically correct. No, it's not about that. It's about being respectful. Right? And if my goal is to be respectful, then I'm going to do that in every aspect of my life. I can't call something the N-word toes at home and not think that that's going to have some kind of bearing on something else that I do. I'm not suggesting that people need to be prudish or whatever, but I think just like this organization, we need to align with our values, and that people don't hear your values, they see your values in everything that you do. And so when you think about communicating, you think about language and relating both with each other as well as with our patients, keep those values in mind and make sure that all your behaviors are in line with those and that you offer them with humility. My name is Koen. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. So the rest of that is just information for you. There are tips on things to do in the back. I also have, just for fun, I have a quiz you can take, and the answers are there too, so I won't leave them hanging. If folks are interested, I can just leave those up at the front. And thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you.